Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
I mean, there's going to be a lot of recrimination about polls, but let's just be honest. Missouri polling is straight up trash. And we really should stop paying attention to it.
More like going to a birthday party or an anniversary celebration. There was no surprise. Everybody knew what was going to happen, and they celebrated it, and when the party was over, they left.
Really figure out how they're going to appeal to more voters across a state that's becoming overwhelmingly conservative.
But sort of try to keep things moderate, right? That we want abortion to be rare and safe and things like that.
The summary was incredibly misleading.
I spoke to a number of people who said, oh gosh, I voted yes on that because I didn't understand what it was.
I love and absolutely love each and every person, and even those who persecute me, I fight.
There is always so much to talk about the morning after an election, and that's just what we did with a host of interesting people on today's St. Louis on the Air. And before we move on, I want to remind you that the biggest source of St. Louis Public Radio's funding comes from listeners like you. Because you value what you hear on St. Louis on the Air, donate today. Go to stlpr.org/donate. That's stlpr.org/donate. I'm Sarah Fensky. This is St. Louis on the Air. November 3rd may have been a late night for you. It was for many Americans. It's hard not having closure on what's been a long and nasty national election. But here in Missouri, we got closure, and relatively early. The AP called the state for Trump around 9:30 p.m., and it also declared Mike Parson the winner of the governor's race.
I believe it is our time to protect the Constitution. I believe it is our time to preserve the American dream. And I believe it is our time to preserve freedoms for the next generation. And it is our time to be governor for 4 more years.
And that was Governor Mike Parson in his victory speech last night. Now, in just a bit, we're going to chew over all of the results that came in last night and the stomping that Missouri Democrats took in just about every race they competed in. Joining me for that will be St. Louis Public Radio reporter Jason Rosenbaum and political science professor Anita Manion. She's with the University of Missouri St. Louis. First, though, I want to check in with Jonathan Ahl. He's St. Louis Public Radio's Rolla reporter, and he was at Republicans' victory party last night in Springfield. Jonathan, welcome.
Good afternoon.
So set the scene for what you witnessed last night. We know this wasn't a traditional election year. Did it end up feeling like a traditional victory party?
In time, yes. There were definitely a lot of things that were different. While there was music and food and, a room full of people, there were fewer people. Actually, they were counting people that would come in and out of the room to stay under a certain threshold, so they would comply with local regulations. I went out to use the restroom, and I had to wait to go back into the room until someone left. That's how closely guarded it was. Most of the people who were not eating or drinking were wearing masks early in the evening. But, when it got to the end of the evening and it was time to do that, cheering and shouting that you heard in that clip from Mike Parson, kind of all of that went out the window, and people were not social distancing and were kind of on top of each other. So it started out as something that looked very, very different and kind of ended up being what you normally expect on election night. And so did the party end up raging on after Parson was able to be declared the winner? Absolutely not. That place cleared out really quickly. And I don't mean that in a derisive way either. It's just I think that they, it felt more like going to a birthday party or an anniversary celebration. There was no surprise. Everybody knew that it was. They knew what was going to happen, and they celebrated it. And when the party was over, they left.
Wait, that's a really good analogy there. Hard to top that one. Now, I know you listened to Governor Parson's victory speech. I want to play what, for me, felt like a key excerpt.
People believe in common sense. And I think they want leaders that believe in common sense. They don't want government to tell them what they want to do every day. They want to live their lives in peace.
That's Governor Mike Parson. Do you get the sense that message was the key to his victory?
Well, what we do the day after elections, we all armchair quarterback this, and we try to pretend like we know exactly what happened. But my best guess would be that, Mike Parson is a veteran, former law enforcement, farmer, and his thrust of his message, as you heard there, was that he trusts you to do what's right for you. That is a message that resonates really, really strongly in at least 111, 112 counties in this state. So it was probably something that was very, very difficult for anybody to overcome.
Now, as you say, this wasn't a surprise at all, but it is worth pointing out that some polls had suggested Nicole Galloway was within the margin of error. I know there was a St. Louis University YouGov poll that put her there within just a few points. Most others thought she was within 10 points. That obviously wasn't the case. Was there a lot of discussion at the party of just how wrong these polls ended up being?
Not these polls. I mean, definitely Jason Smith, the congressman from southeastern Missouri, who kind of was the hype man all night up at the podium, he talked about polls, but he only talked about them in reference to other states and national polls. He didn't talk about any of the Missouri polls. And in terms of, did we see this coming or not, I would, maybe Anita will have some more comment on this later on, but from what we've seen in the last, 4 to 6 years, can any of us really trust any polls anymore?
I think that's a great question. And Jonathan Ahl, I want to thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, Nicole Galloway, who was Parsons' Democratic opponent, she gave her concession speech on Facebook Live. Let's listen to a clip from that.
Over this course of this campaign, we built a coalition of Missourians who were united around a few simple values: that we can no longer ignore science and the growing threat of COVID-19, that no one should be denied access to health care amidst a deadly pandemic, and that our children deserve to live in a Missouri that is fair and accountable to all of its citizens.
That is State Auditor Nicole Galloway, and joining us with some perspective from the Galloway camp is St. Louis Public Radio State House reporter Jaclyn Driscoll. Jaclyn, were Democrats disappointed with her showing?
Oh, Sarah, I don't think that there's any doubt that Democrats throughout the state of Missouri were very disappointed in how last night turned out. Republicans had a banner night in almost every aspect possible for the election. So not just in terms of Galloway, but also just, across the board. In the House and Senate, they held on to their supermajority. The Republicans swept all of the statewide offices that were up for election. So Democrats are definitely licking their wounds today and have to really figure out how they're going to appeal to more voters across a state that's becoming overwhelmingly conservative. It's clear they cannot alienate rural voters in Missouri, and they're going to have to figure out a way to pick some of those votes up and appeal to more people throughout the state.
I think it was interesting that all these people running for these state offices, they actually underperformed the Biden campaign here in Missouri. People didn't have love for these locals. Some of these Democrats could only muster about 36 to 38%. Has there been a lot of discussion of that this morning? I know the morning is still young.
or a really late night, depending on
Yes.
how things are shaken up for you. I don't necessarily find that extremely surprising. Now, that's not to say that the Democratic opponents in those races were bad candidates. They were great candidates. I had the pleasure of speaking to most, if not all of them. Missouri is just becoming overwhelmingly conservative, and people are more likely to vote Republican up and down the ballots. Also, you have to take into consideration the name recognition in a lot of these races, right? Attorney General Eric Schmidt, he was a former lawmaker. We have Jay Ashcroft on the ballot as our Secretary of State, and we know that the Ashcroft name throughout Missouri, is very strong, obviously in Missouri, but also, throughout the country with his dad and the Bush administration. So I don't know that it was too shocking, as I've hashed over with Jason Rosenbaum, the other political expert in St. Louis Public Radio. It's not for lack of trying for these Democratic candidates on the statewide ticket. It's just, Republicans poll really well here.
So do you think last night's results will change anything about the way Missouri is governed? We saw a whole bunch of incumbents win. Does that mean it's going to be more of the same?
I mean, Republicans held on to their supermajorities, as I mentioned, in both chambers of the legislature. They also hold, the governor's mansion in all statewide spots besides Auditor Nicole Galloway. So I think Missourians have spoke loud and clear that they like the way the direction the state is heading. And we also saw that by President Donald Trump overwhelmingly beating Joe Biden, though it wasn't as large of a margin as we saw when Trump beat Hillary Clinton in 2016. He won that by about 19 points last night. I think Trump was beating Biden by about 15, but it's still, voters spoke loud and clear here in Missouri that they like this conservative approach and they're happy with the direction the state is headed.
Well, Jaclyn Driscoll, I want to thank you so much for that analysis.
Thank you.
We need to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get analysis on all the top local races. That'll be from Jason Rosenbaum and political scientist Anita Manion. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. And now to our conversation. Last night was a bad night for Missouri Democrats. They got trounced in statewide contests. Every statewide Democratic candidate won a lower share of the vote than presidential contender Joe Biden. And other Democrats running statewide failed to match State Auditor Nicole Galloway's 40% share of the vote. Democrats also failed to capture the congressional seat held by Ann Wagner. That was a key target for them this election cycle. It's almost shocking to think that just 4 years and 1 day ago, Democrats held the governor's office, the attorney general's office, the secretary of state's office, and they came close to knocking off a longtime senator, Roy Blunt, in November of 2016. So what happened, and what do last night's results tell us about the state of this state? Well, joining me now to discuss all of that is Anita Manion. She's a political science professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis. Anita, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we're also joined by St. Louis Public Radio reporter Jason Rosenbaum. Jason, welcome.
Hey.
So, Jason, Democrats got a shellacking in Missouri last night. Did you anticipate them doing this poorly?
No, because I didn't think Trump was going to win by 15 points. But it goes without saying that polling in Missouri is god-awful. There was a poll that said that he was only up by 5, and then the Morning Consult said he was up by 9. I mean, there's going to be a lot of recrimination about polls, but let's just be honest. Missouri polling is straight up trash, and we really should stop paying attention to it.
Anita, do you share that view? It's straight up trash at this point?
I don't know if those are my words, but yeah, I can't disagree with Jason. When we look at polling in some of the battleground states, we get some high quality polls, but here in Missouri, they're few and far between.
So, Anita, were you surprised that Trump was able to take as large of a share of the vote as he did here and then carried along, it appears, a number of other people with him?
I was also surprised by such a large margin by President Trump. And then once we saw that margin being evident, then it wasn't so surprising that the down ballot candidates benefited from that. But I was expecting a more narrow win, maybe more like 7 or 9 points for Trump.
Now, I know this is an old topic for both of you guys, but it just blows my mind looking at where Missouri Democrats were 4 years and a day ago versus where they are today. For people who are new to this shock and confusion, Jason, what would you attribute this to?
Their complete and full collapse in rural Missouri. I'm old enough to remember when Democrats actually held a majority of legislative seats in Northeast Missouri, which is now like 70-80% Republican. They are Southeast Missouri. Joe Manis has made this point. Southeast Missouri, the congressional district there, is almost as Republican as the Southwest Missouri district.
And that did not used to be the case.
No, absolutely not. So that is number one, their big problem. But their other big problem, too, is they have no foothold in populous conservative suburbs. Now, St. Charles was always going to be a white whale for Missouri Democrats. They've been trying to get a foothold in there for years without success. But the fact that, Jefferson County, which used to be a fairly Democratic county, 4, 6, 8 years ago, went 60-40 for Trump and Parson. Even if you gain ground in St. Louis County, which they clearly have, you're never going to win a statewide election if you have those numbers. And also you're getting those numbers in like places like Buchanan County and Cass County. I think that Nicole Galloway lost Clay County yesterday, which was like a Democratic leading. So it's a mess. I wish I could be nicer to Missouri Democrats because, as Jaclyn mentioned, there are many really, great people working in that party, both as candidates and people. But it's a mess right now for them.
Anita, I thought this was the year that suburban women were all supposed to go Democrat and that was going to change the fortunes, maybe, at least for, say, a race like the congressional race involving Jill Shoup and Ann Wagner. What do we know about what happened there?
That's a great question. In 2018, I think Democrats really got their hopes up for that Missouri 2nd District because Wagner had won that by margins of 20 points or more in the past. But then she had a fairly unknown challenger, Court Van Ostren, who narrowed that margin to 4 points. And so Democrats really thought that they had a chance to flip that district with Jill Shoup, a much more experienced politician in Missouri. And to me, this was the much more surprising race than Trump's margins or Nicole Galloway's loss. That not only did Ann Wagner win, that wasn't necessarily surprising, but that she won by such a big margin over Jill Shoup. Ann Wagner did better in St. Louis County, slightly better than she did in 2018 even.
Jason, I know you were very bullish on Jill Shoup's chances. What do you think? What are your thoughts on this race?
Well, first of all, if you look at the absentees, there was a huge absentee margin for Shoup. But then once the in-person votes came, it flipped pretty quickly. And as Anita mentioned, Wagner won St. Louis County. And we were talking about like Shoup winning by 2, 3, 4 percentage points, and could she make up the margins in St. Charles? I mean, the fact that Wagner won St. Louis County meant that the shift that, people like me were looking at in central and western St. Louis County toward the Democrats just did not materialize. We could talk about, President Trump, and we could talk about broader patterns, but sometimes you also have to give credit to candidates. Like Ann Wagner is one of the sharpest and most experienced political minds in Missouri Republican politics. She has really worked her way up to get to the point where she is today, going back like 2 or 3 decades. And I know she has a lot of detractors. I know people don't like her on policies. They don't think that she holds enough town hall meetings. But sometimes you just got to tip your hat and say, Ann Wagner's a good candidate, and she knows what she's doing. And I think that, when she was running against someone like Jill Shoup, who's also a really, really good candidate, when she wins by that much, sometimes the candidate matters. And I think we can't just talk about these things in abstract without acknowledging that.
I know Democrats spent a lot more on that race this time than they spent 2 years ago. Doesn't seem to have helped. Overall, were Democrats badly outspent in Missouri, or was it less of a money thing?
I haven't checked the numbers, but it's not like Jill Shoup didn't have financial resources. She outraised Ann Wagner a number of times, and she had the support of crucial third-party Democratic groups. You can't blame this on a lack of money. You have to blame it on the fact that the shift in St. Louis County that Democrats were hoping for did not materialize, and that Ann Wagner was a better candidate than I think a lot of Democrats bargained for.
One of the things that we heard going into yesterday was all about turnout, that this was all going to come down to turnout, and people were thinking there would be huge turnout. Anita, did that materialize?
We did see turnout up in the state and in St. Louis County, but one of the things that was a bit surprising to me and I think disappointing to Missouri Democrats is that turnout in St. Louis City was actually slightly down from 2016. So there seemed to be enthusiasm in rural areas. Jefferson County and St. Charles County increased their voter registration and their turnout, which helped Republicans. But that St. Louis City turnout, I think, is something that the Democrats also need to consider.
My guests today are Anita Manion. She's a political science professor at UMSL. And I'm also joined by St. Louis Public Radio reporter Jason Rosenbaum. Now, we already have a lot of callers who want to join us, but we're curious to hear your thoughts on this, particularly if you have a question for either of our guests, or if you have some thoughts on what went wrong for Missouri Democrats here. It's something the party could do to put the state back in play. You can give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can also send us a tweet at STL on air. Let's go to Reese, who's calling from Kirksville. Reese, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi. So I'm the president of the College Democrats of Missouri, so if you can believe it, I've kind of got some thoughts about where things might have gone wrong.
I bet.
And I would say probably the first thing, I've been in Northeast Missouri for about 4 years, and I've gotten to meet a whole lot of different kinds of people and different kinds of Democrats. I think there was an expectation that the bottom had fallen out 4 years ago, and so things could be made up in the suburbs. But I think we really didn't anticipate how many rural voters did not vote 4 years ago and how Republican-leaning they would be. And it seems that, like, you look at margins up here, Parson outperformed Greidens by double digits. And so it doesn't look like you can win 5 counties every election and be a viable political party in this state.
I see Jason Rosenbaum nodding. I think, Reese, you're making a good point here.
First of all, thank you so much for calling in. And because I love hearing people from Northeast Missouri. I spent the first part of my career at the Columbia Tribune covering Northeast Missouri politics. He's absolutely right. I don't know if Democrats are ever going to be able to get to the point where they were, when Champ Clark was around and was almost president of the United States. He's from Bowling Green, Missouri. But the caller's right. They cannot lose, like, rural Missouri 75-25. They're going to lose automatically that way.
So, Reese, you're there. Do you think there's something the Democrats could do differently, or is it just that the Democrats' core values are not what rural Missouri people want?
I think that obviously there is a lot different that could be done. I think that we probably would benefit from perhaps a more populist message. I know that that's something that we're a little afraid of because of, we don't want to sound like Donald Trump. But honestly, if 60% of the state is going to vote for Donald Trump, then it may not be so terrible to sound a little like him, so much as that we, maintain core values on cultural issues. But I really do think that economic anxiety is a thing in this part of the state because there's just so much manufacturing that's gone, and there's seems to be an increase in poverty and just real human suffering that I think isn't really well known to people living along 170.
Reese, I think that's a really interesting observation. Anita, any thoughts on what Reese is saying there?
I completely agree that the Democrats cannot bank on just those counties. They really need to get out to the rural areas. It seems to me, too, that when it comes to issues, policies, ballot initiatives, the progressive issues have passed statewide. So in some ways, I think it's not a policy problem when we saw folks voting for Medicaid expansion and minimum wage. I think there's cultural issues, identity issues, and a nationalization of our elections. So where we tie things to Nancy Pelosi, AOC, or Donald Trump, that is connecting with these. So when you see the ballot initiatives passing by 2/3 in Missouri, but candidates who oppose those initiatives winning in those districts. I had a state representative tell me a couple years ago when I posed that question to him that folks in his district overwhelmingly voted for issues he opposed. And he said, well, all that matters to my voters are 2 things, babies and guns.
Wow. I'm processing that right now. Stacy, who's a listener on our St. Louis on the Air Facebook page, she wrote, why isn't anyone playing the part of Parsons' acceptance speech where he talks about Christian values? And he did put a big emphasis on this in his speech, really emphasized the word Christian. Jason, do you think that's a big winner for the GOP, something the Democrats just don't want to do?
Well, I noticed that because I was at one of his final rallies in St. Charles County, and he mentioned something, and I'm paraphrasing here, and I have had no sleep, so I may be not saying it right, but it's like, we passed this really restrictive abortion ban because we sent good Christians to Jefferson City. Now, I am old enough to remember that there was a governor named Eric Greitens who was a Reformed Jew who also signed restrictive abortion legislation. So I don't know why he's doing that. I think it may just be the fact that a lot of evangelical Christians support or oppose abortion rights, and that may be playing around. It could also be, and to defend the governor, he just may have a deep Christian faith that he really believes in and wants to emphasize this in a state that is deeply religious in certain places. I may not be the best person to express that as a non-Christian, but I have talked to a lot of people who are deeply religious in this state, And faith does play a pretty pivotal role in decision-making for a lot of voters.
Is there a way that Missouri Democrats could take abortion off the table, since that seems like such a big winning issue for the GOP here?
I don't. That's a tough question, because it was about a decade ago where they had a lot of legislators that opposed abortion rights. They still have a couple, but that because they've lost all their ground in rural Missouri, that contingent no longer exists, is no longer seen as a viable part of their coalition. And I just think nationally, like, there's not a lot of patience in the Democratic Party to include a lot of anti-abortion rights members into the party. So I just don't think that's a good solution for them right now.
Let's go back to the phone lines. And I do want to thank Reese, the president of the College Dems. He was a great caller. Really enjoyed talking to him. Sharon is calling from University City. Sharon, hi. You're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I am a Democrat. I am from rural Missouri. I've gone to town halls and I've tried to let people know that when you're trying to reach rural Missouri, rather than ram down their throat what you're trying to do, go knock on their doors and ask them what they want, what their issues are.
And do you get the sense that's not happening, Sharon?
Oh, it's not happening. They're so interested. When I say they, the Democrats are so, and I'm annoyed, they're so interested in getting their message out and in blaming people because they didn't get their message out. And while all along this, I feel very strongly it could all change if they would just listen. They don't go and say, Mr. Jones, what's your issue on this farm today?
Sharon, thank you for that observation. Anita, what do you think about what Sharon's saying?
Sharon raises a great point, and I do think the Democrats are missing that. I think also when they only sort of resurface and establish some outposts in these areas every 2 or 4 years, that's not helpful in building those relationships and that trust. And I am also curious if the Democrats' approach to campaigning in a pandemic may have also hurt them, because that eliminated sort of those town halls, those discussions, and even door knocking for most Democrats in the state.
Jason, you agree with that?
I want to bring up a specific race, the Andrew Koenig-Deb Lavender race. Andrew Koenig, who is a senator for the 15th district in St. Louis County, was seen as very vulnerable because he was seen as too right-wing or extreme for the district. And he knew he had a fight on his hands last year. So I've been told that he knocked on 70,000 doors since September.
70,000?
70,000. And there were a lot of people writing Andrew Koenig off. He had a really strong political team. Casey Burns, for example, a longtime Republican operative, helped run his campaign. So I've heard that she deserves a lot of credit. But Koenig took the fact of going straight to voters and listening them to heart. Like, I've spoken with Senator Koenig a lot, and when you talk with him one-on-one, even if you don't agree with him on the issues, you can find certain relatable aspects to him. And I think that the door knocking in that race, I think, is the reason he won by 10 points.
You know, we did hear from a lot of people on our St. Louis on the Air Twitter, and many of them pointed to this same thing. Ruby writes, I didn't receive any Dem mail, didn't have anyone canvassing in my neighborhood for anything progressive or Dem. They're relying too much on texts instead of building relationships on the ground. Brian writes, not a single Dem canvassed my neighborhood. All I got were texts and wasteful mailers. Pandemic response focus didn't work. Identity politics is a huge waste of everyone's time. Dems were painted as lockdowners, for better or worse. Simply not enough community investment. A couple other people also saying too many texts. I think maybe we can all agree a text is a very annoying way to campaign. Although I also feel the pain of campaigns. How else do you reach people? I want to go back to the phone lines. Harry is calling from University City on a topic we've just been discussing, and that's abortion. Harry, what are your thoughts on that as it relates to the Democratic Party?
You know, I agree with a lot of the discussion that the Democrats have been too dismissive of the pro-life position, and they should listen, and they should try to, I don't know, maybe try to reach a middle ground where they can maintain their pro-life position. But, for example, maybe just an example would be try to educate high school students a little bit better about what abortion really involves. And I realize that's sensitive and it gets into the separation of church and state, but again, just to try to open those lines of communication a little better and make the rural people feel as though they're being listened to.
Harry, thank you for that there. Anita, this is obviously such a contentious issue in the U.S. as well as within Missouri. Is there any way that the Democrats could moderate their position on abortion without alienating their base that this is so important to?
Well, we have seen some candidates in recent years statewide, like Claire McCaskill, take a stance on that, but sort of try to keep things moderate, right? That we want abortion to be rare and safe and things like that. To me, the Democrats in Missouri aren't going to necessarily win that abortion argument. Maybe they can find a middle ground and say, they don't support late-term abortions and different things like that. But I think changing the narrative and focusing on maybe economic issues, healthcare issues, finding things that are really impacting rural voters, education, and finding common ground on those might be a more effective strategy.
See, I hear you on that, but I also heard Nicole Galloway's campaign, and I feel like she talked about that, and maybe it wasn't the top issue for people. Or do you think this is just a case where maybe she wasn't doing it in the right way?
I mean, you're right. I go back to that quote that I gave you from the state legislator that for some people, there is one or two issues that are going to supersede everything else. Mm-hmm. But how do we get maybe those swing voters, those moderates, those more young voters out in rural Missouri? Can you connect with them and build a new coalition? I think of a lot of the more rural, I grew up in Jefferson County, and I think of the Democrats that I grew up with out there, a lot of folks that work with my dad at the Chrysler plant who were union members. And so those labor issues and economic issues were more important to them than things like abortion. So how could the Democrats build maybe a coalition of younger voters in Missouri so they have a future in the state?
Jason, we have time for just one more question before the break, but I feel like it's important to mention. We also heard from a lot of people on Twitter who feel like it's prejudice that carries the day for Republicans. Sam writes, rural white bigots. They vote based on whatever will own the libs the hardest. It's not any more complicated than that. Do you think Democrats are right to blame this on saying a bunch of the other party is simply racist?
Oh, man, that is a tough question to answer.
You have 60 seconds.
Do I think that there is racism in Missouri? Absolutely.
Is that a reason Democrats lose?
Do I think that it plays a part in why Democrats aren't winning? Absolutely. But I also have visited rural Missouri for most of my time here, and I wouldn't paint that entire area with a broad brush. And I don't think that's all I'm going to say, since I think we're running pretty fast into the break.
Okay, well, my guests today are St. Louis Public Radio reporter Jason Rosenbaum. And, of course, I gave him a very hardball question there and just 60 seconds to answer it. But we have a lot more to discuss. We're also talking to Anita Manion, a political science professor at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. And when we come back after the break, we'll talk to the woman who was just elected Missouri's first black congresswoman, and we'll continue to talk to both Jason and Anita. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. Welcome back. For all the doom and gloom in last night's election results for Missouri Democrats, there was one very bright spot. Missouri voters have elected for the first time a black woman to represent them in Congress. That woman is Cori Bush. She's a nurse, a pastor, and an activist. She beat incumbent Congressman William Lacey Clay 3 months ago. But last night, she made it official in the general election, easily besting a Republican and a Libertarian. And she joins us today. So, Congresswoman-elect, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. Good to talk to you.
So congratulations on your victory. I know you were the clear favorite in this general election, but is there still a sense of relief this morning that it's over and that you won?
Absolutely, because now I feel like I can actually start to, get the work done. Before it was just like, you're still the candidate, and people are like, I need this, and I'm like, I'm still the candidate.
And now I bet you're just itching to get sworn in. I mean, you're not going to be able to solve these problems right away.
Right. But, at least now I can start to, learn my job. I'm so ready.
So last night was a tough night for Missouri Democrats, as we've been discussing on this show. Was it hard celebrating when so many people you were rooting for saw their own dreams dashed?
It was when I finally had took a second to start looking at results while we were waiting on our results. No, right after, I believe. I just, it was difficult because Missouri, we have to do better. Like we can't continue to support progressive values, but not candidates who have progressive ideas. And we have to move past being afraid of people who speak up for just regular people, because we are all regular people, so it's okay for people to have clean water, clean air, and have safety, but safety cannot only look like law and order. And I think that is the problem that we have in this state. Safety is not only law and order. Safety is having a place, an adequate place to sleep. Safety is that black people can walk around this community, this country, this state, the same way that a white person can. That an undocumented person, that an immigrant, that a differently abled person can go about this community the same way as anyone else. And that is the point. And so in order for us to have better in our communities, in order for us to get to where we need as a community and have this true unity and be community, we have to start there. So we have to do better electing people who care about all people, not just a certain particular group.
So do you think for Missouri Democrats, this is maybe a need to reframe the conversation to say, you think you're talking about safety, you're not talking about everything we need to talk about when we talk about safety?
No, I think that this is I think it's a conversation that is across the board. I think that when you look at, so when we look at our governor, when we look at the rhetoric that he has been putting out, I'm so disappointed. I'm so disappointed in our governor, because you have to be the representative of every single person. You don't have to like me. You don't have to like what I say, but I'm trying to save lives. And so while I'm trying to save lives, you are putting lives in jeopardy, including mine. And so I am still your constituent, and so are all the people, so are all the nurses who put their lives on the line to save lives, because COVID-19 is that real thing, that we see is hurting our community. So that's where it has to start. So we can't have a governor that is not representing all people and then expect that thing to flow down into the community. But that's okay. We will galvanize. We will mobilize. We'll push forward and make sure that we lift up Missouri, because he won't.
Well, I love your optimism. It's always one of the best things about talking to you is that you just always find a way to say, yeah, we're going to make this happen. Now, at this point, the national election, it's still too close to call. You could end up working with President Trump. Are you ready for that?
I am. Look, Sarah, I have, along with so many others, we have faced so many struggles and problems and hardships and, just living out this life in this state, in this country. And then just coming from where I come from, being unhoused, being low wage, living uninsured, being a single parent with 2 children, living out of a car, all the things, being a survivor of sexual assault, a survivor of domestic violence, being left for dead, and then standing before tanks, enduring rubber bullets and tear gas and all of that. If I can handle that, if so many others in our communities can handle that, we can handle Donald Trump. We will fight Donald Trump tooth and nail. We will fight all of his cronies and every single minion that he has around this state and country. We will fight him. I'm not afraid to do that. If I wasn't afraid of those tanks and afraid of what could happen to me, if I wasn't afraid of every death threat and death attempt, I won't be afraid to go after him.
There you go. And last question for you today. There's been a lot of talk about how by you coming to D.C. that it's going to be another member of this squad that the media likes to talk about. Do you consider this, is this going to be sort of your coalition there within the House?
It's already my coalition. Those are my folks. I love them. It's not even just we have like values. Those are people who are doing work, and I know it's difficult. I know it's lonely, but this is what we have to do. It's okay to blaze paths. It's okay to blaze trails. It's okay to be a pioneer, and that's what they're doing. So I absolutely stand with them and will join up and be a part of this. Just like anybody else, you don't have to be a Congress member to be a part of the squad. The squad is big. As long as you're like-minded and you're ready to work for the people, all people, because you just have a love of humanity, which I have. People try to say that I hate police. People try to say that I hate people, just all kinds of stuff, and it's just pure crap. It's absolute crap. I love and absolutely love each and every person, and even those who persecute me, I fight for too. So that's who I am, and I'm so excited to be a part of the squad.
And you are ready to welcome everyone into the squad who wants to be in it. That's amazing to hear. Well, Congresswoman-elect Cori Bush, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations again on your big victory last night.
Thank you.
And it is always such a pleasure to talk to Cori. And we are now going back to our two political analysts here. We have St. Louis Public Radio reporter Jason Rosenbaum, and we have Anita Manion of the University of Missouri St. Louis. And I would be remiss not to talk about Amendment 3. We have to talk about this, Jason.
My favorite topic, state legislative redistricting.
I know you love this topic. Now, we got a voicemail about Amendment 3 results. Basically, voters said they were not going to stick with Clean Missouri. They were going to overturn this and go to this new redistricting system. And here's what Kirkwood Councilwoman Kara Wirtz had to say about that.
Hi, my name is Kara. I'm calling in from Kirkwood. My biggest concern with Amendment 3 passing is how this now affects Kirkwood's representation on a state level, which includes access to certain funding and autonomy. And with these changes now, about 1/3 of our population won't be counted for representation because they're under 18, which now puts us at a disadvantage when it comes to decisions making in Jeff City just because we happen to be a family-friendly city. I think Kirkwood will be able to come up with solutions to some of the financial pitfalls that will come our way because of this, but I do worry about our region as a whole because we do have so many residents under the age of 18. That's all. Thanks so much.
So that is Kirkwood Councilwoman Kara Wirtz. And I know the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, their headline across their website this morning was, Missouri voters approve Republican bid to alter redistricting rules. It won't count kids in the process, makes Missouri the first state that won't count children or non-citizens as part of the process to draw districts. Now, Jason, I know you have some strong thoughts about this.
I'm sorry. That is just not true. Okay. It is not required under Amendment 3 to not count children. It is an option. Mm-hmm. And this is not the proponents telling me. The opponents admitted that it wasn't required. Now,
so it remains to be seen whether this will be the standard.
It remains to be seen, and people need to be vigilant about this. But look, I know that there's been a lot of emphasis on the commissions, the bipartisan commissions that, proponents say is a citizen commission and the opponents say are shady insiders and lobbyists. But it is still my belief that those commissions will never produce a map under this because they're large, they're 20 members, and you need 4 Democrats or 4 Republicans to vote on a House or Senate map, and I just don't see that happening. So most likely, because Amendment 3 narrowly passed, you are going to see appellate judges draw House and Senate districts. And it just strikes me as a big leap to think that appellate judges picked under the nonpartisan court plan who are not directly elected are suddenly going to decide to do eligible voter versus total population. Now, obviously, we have to be vigilant, and if they do that, I'm sure there'll be an outcry about that. But no, it is not required under. I'm not defending Amendment 3. There clearly are issues with it, but there is not required. Mm-hmm. And I think that really needs to be emphasized because people have thought that it is a requirement.
Okay. And so this ballgame isn't over yet in terms of that specific issue of redistricting. Something else here is a question of how Amendment 3 did so well. The No on Amendment 3 campaign spent $5.3 million is the latest total I saw. Backers spent nothing. Rachel writes on Twitter, I'm curious about this. I saw almost no visible support of Amendment 3 in terms of signage. Was there support that I missed, or did people make up their minds based on the ballot language? Anita Manion, any thoughts on how Amendment 3 pulled off this victory?
I do think it was the ballot language that led to Missourians overturning what they overwhelmingly voted for 2 years ago. And I spoke to a number of people who said, oh gosh, I voted yes on that because I didn't understand what it was. And so the ballot language really put first those lobbyist restrictions, which are appealing to people, and later, where people may not have read down, explained that this was overturning a ballot initiative from 2018. Certainly the opponents greatly outspent the supporters, but also in rural areas, the Farm Bureau was anti-Amendment 3. So I got that reversed. The folks who were anti-Amendment 3 greatly outspent the supporters, but the Farm Bureau supported it. And so I think that might have helped build some credibility in rural Missouri as well.
We got an email from Garrett. He writes, my main concern with Missouri's results last night boils down to this. By passing Amendment 3, Missouri voters have essentially told the state legislature that if legislators don't like something that the voters have passed, Clean Missouri, for example, they can simply ignore it and find a way to get out of it. Importantly, I worry that this tacitly gives them permission to not expand Medicaid in the state, despite the results from August. Jason, is this a fair concern by Garrett?
I don't know, because Medicaid expansion is a constitutional amendment, so it's not optional. Similarly, that Clean Missouri was a constitutional amendment, so it wasn't optional until voters decided to repeal it. So I don't know. I have heard rumblings that there may be people that really don't like Medicaid expansion that may try to find a way to get around the constitutional amendment, but I just don't know if that will happen. Now, as far as I agree. The summary was the death knell. And the appellate judges that wrote that summary basically led to Clean Missouri's demise. And I've said this before. This is an insular point. I know we're running low on time. The summary was incredibly misleading for a reason that people aren't bringing up. And that is going back to my main point, where it said it gives responsibility to the bipartisan commissions that are unlikely to do anything. They should have probably put bipartisan commissions or appellate judges just to hedge. And I think that putting the minuscule changes to lobbyist gift and donation limits before the redistricting part, I think that was pretty damaging, if not deadly.
That was the
Clean Missouri.
fatal action right there.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, I also want to talk, I think we have about 3.5 minutes left. I want to talk about Prop D. This is something that city voters approved. This creates nonpartisan elections in St. Louis, also adds this interesting wrinkle of approval voting. Anita, is this a big deal from your point of view?
I think it is a big deal. It will have a significant impact on St. Louis politics. And I think that some of the motivation behind it was highlighted when we heard Tashara Jones say she's going to announce her candidacy for mayor today. That mayoral primary with Lyda Krewson and Tashara Jones, I think, was the impetus for many people to support this proposition.
And certainly the backers of this thing, many of them were allies of Tashara Jones. It's no secret she wanted to get this in, and a lot of people wanted to stop it because they thought this would make things a lot easier for her. I think it remains to be seen if that'll happen. Yeah,
Antonio French, a former alderman, brought up this really interesting scenario in the Post-Dispatch where allies of Lyda Krewson may convince since you can vote under approval voting, you can vote for multiple candidates. They may be like, vote for Lyda Krewson and Jimmy Matthews, perennial candidate that, annoys people by putting signs in right of ways. If they both get 32% of the vote and they move on to the runoff, well, I'm sorry, Jimmy Matthews fans, Lyda Krewson is probably going to win that. It remains to be seen if that would actually be successful, but that was something I'd never thought of. And the fact that this may empower Jimmy Matthews is, I think, probably the strangest development. Well, there are other reasons, though. It also makes elections for some offices nonpartisan, and there is that runoff aspect. And I'll be interested to see how this unfolds, and also if our good friend Jimmy Matthews becomes mayor because of this.
Boy, I want to pay close attention to that. That is a wrinkle, as Jason said, that we did not see coming. Jason, I would also be remiss not to mention the county executive race. Sam Page pretty much cruised to re-election.
And I was watching to see if the margin was smaller than when Steve Stenger, a self-professed liar and criminal, beat Paul Berry by about 20 percentage points, and if it was lower, if that was bad for Sam Page. Sam Page won by more. He's still in for a very rough tenure because he does not have a county council that's completely aligned with him. So, well, it remains to be seen if he still has the political juice in 2 years when he has to run for a full term.
So looking ahead, speaking of 2 years from now, Joseph writes on Twitter, Democrats will need a candidate for the 2022 Senate race against Roy Blunt, but none of their statewide candidates in the past few years have come close, other than Galloway as auditor. Who's on their bench as the next big name? Anita, is there even a bench?
I think that's hard to say. Like Jason pointed out earlier, some of the candidates I thought had compelling stories and backgrounds for the statewide offices for the Democrats this election, but they didn't seem to get traction at all. So I guess you could ask, is Galloway, a candidate for the Senate seat? But boy, no one is coming to mind for me other than, maybe you have someone like a Tashara Jones or somebody try to step up.
Jason, final
a more
30
progressive
seconds here.
candidate, which I don't know how that will play statewide, but it could get some energy in this region.
I know a lot of Democrats want Jason Kander to walk through that door, but I don't think it's happening. And I also think that Jason Kander is doing great right now. It's going to be tough sledding, I think, to face off against Blunt. But you know what? 2 years is an eternity in Missouri politics, and who knows, we could see a blue wave in 2 years' time.
You just never know. And as Jason says, 2 years is an eternity. I have a feeling the next couple days are going to be an eternity. So St. Louis Public Radio reporter Jason Rosenbaum, thank you for joining us. And Anita Manion, political science professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.